So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining today's webcast, which is about API security being a digital enabler. So my name is Martin Gagnon, and I'm a pre-sale consultant for API management based in Prague, Czech Republic. So just bear with me. I'm going to share my screen real quick. All right. So as I just mentioned, I'm a pre-sale consultant at CA Technologies for API management, and my main goal is pretty much to help customers eliminate the obstacles between their ideas and the desired business outcomes. So let's begin, shall we? So during this webcast, feel free to post any questions in the WebEx Q&A chat, and following the webinar, if time allows it, I will answer some of the questions that have been posted into this Q&A chat. However, should we be running out of time, or if I can answer your questions, no worries. I'll get back in touch with you by email within the next few days. So in today's application economy, it's basically characterized by higher and higher expectations from consumers, buyers, and investors. For instance, 94% of executives are facing an increased pressure to reduce their time to market, and 30% of those enterprises said that they would monetize their data asset by the end of 2016, which was last year. But what really got my attention when I was looking at this study was the fact that in 2013, 25% of users would abandon a web application after less than 6 seconds of delay. And when I reviewed a newer version of the same study, 2 years later, wow, it went from 25% to 68%, and these users would not only abandon an application, but a brand as well, after less than 6 seconds of delay. So for me, this really represented the change of pace that is being imposed by the application economy, forcing more and more enterprises to go through the digital transformation. So on this slide, we can see here the top priorities for over 2,000 top budget decision makers of global enterprises based on a research that was conducted by Forrester. So what all these priorities have in common is that when things start to get serious and investments are being made, well, the most common approach to tackle these challenges is to basically adopt a digital transformation project. So over the past few years, APIs have become a top technology investment for business executives. Why? Well, they provide connectivity between critical enterprise information and data, such as, for example, products, prices, customers, behaviors, and any device, application, or things that connect to the Internet. And from mine, I like to compare APIs to a bridge that connects disparate applications that are part of a digital ecosystem. And in a world where we count the number of connected devices in the hundreds of billions, and this number keeps growing rapidly, as you can imagine, well, APIs can become for an enterprise a safe, convenient, and scalable way to expose business capabilities to those devices. And at CA Technologies, we like to refer to APIs as the building block of digital transformation. So let's take a look at a real example. When you go to a typical application running on the web, like a weather website, for instance, you're using a web browser to retrieve the desired info, and the data is being passed back and forth between the web server and your computer. And the computer is using its processing power to generate a great customer experience. I mean, this was a great model over 15 years ago when the number of form factors could be counted in a single hand. Right, just bear with me. Great. Just going to go back real quick. So today, we have a complete different scenario. Rendering a desktop browser experience on a smartphone is definitely not going to be a great experience for any consumer. There's going to be significant UI and performance issues, and passing this info over a mini data link is going to be quite painful. So in a situation like this, some companies will update the presentation on the server side, but this is usually not a great workaround. Why? Well, they'll be able to address the issue for a limited number of different tablets and displays, for instance, but if the data needs to be consumed by a watch, a car, or a thermostat, then they go back to square one. So this model is definitely no longer acceptable in a mobile and Internet of Things world. So how about bringing APIs to the solution? Well, in this example, it allows a business to remove the browser from the mix, as well as keeping complex systems and data behind something that's much easier for developers to work with. So these developers can focus on the presentation aspect. They can basically optimize the user experience for a particular device, a specific CPU or screen size, and they can make the data accessible for users at their fingertips. So the end result is a better user experience and a higher performance from consumers, as well as higher efficiency, manageability, and scalability for an enterprise. Now, APIs in this example can help an enterprise to take better advantage of emerging technologies and also embrace new form factors like smartwatches or thermostats, as well as offering her a possibility of like monetization the data usage and also the interaction with the Internet of Things. But hey, let's face it, iOS Siri is cool, GM OnStar is cool, Uber is cool. I mean, not only are these applications cool, but they also make us save time and money. They're quite convenient, and they all drove digital transformation acceptance within their users, because when we start using them, we were okay with the fact and the way they were operating. Now let's take a look at some examples of key business verticals that are benefiting from digital transformation, which is more important than ever. So I'm almost positive, 100% positive that almost everyone on this webcast today is using a banking app on her smartphone, right? Well, banking apps are one of many ways used by financial institutions to reach other customers in a different way. But digital transformation performed by such a vertical like finance or a bank will go way beyond that. They can get better integration with their partner. They can offer risk-based authentication to their clients. They can also comply to PSD2 initiative, offer additional service to their customers, and so on. As for the healthcare vertical, well, digital transformation will help them in their efforts to put in place electronic health records, release mobile apps for patient care, integrate with labs and pharmacies to secure IoT medical equipment, and so on. As for the retail vertical, digital transformation can help them to better handle busy peak periods, to benefit as well from omni-channel approach for different peripherals, also reach a wider market, enhance their stores with artificial intelligence, etc. Finally, when it comes down to the transportation vertical, well, digital transformation will help them to offer tracking and location inquiries, offer consistency for web, mobile, and in-store environments, better integrate with supply chains to fully embrace automation and this kind of example. So we went through a few examples of different verticals that benefited from digital transformation. And guess what? This digital transformation is still ongoing at various levels as we speak. So 3 years from now, 100 million consumers will do their shopping through augmented reality. 30% of web browsing will be done without using a computer screen at all. That's a lot. $1 trillion per year will be saved in maintenance and service through IoT, and by 2022, you also have the IT modernization will be at least 30% higher in 2018 compared to last year, 2016, when it comes down to spending money at different levels. So clearly, specific industries are trying to adapt and they want to transform themselves, but they have a lot of challenges they have to go through when it comes down to digital transformation projects. Let's take a look at some of them. So the first one is omni-channel delivery. It's quite hard. Companies are facing increasing volume of mobile traffic as well as a poor and inconsistent customer experience, and that's usually caused by data and capabilities locked in silos. Then there's the aspect of data and security risk. It keeps growing, so many APIs and apps have to be exposed by companies outside for different reasons, yet protection needs to be balanced with convenience such as single sign-on being demanded more and more by customers across their mobile experience. And in today's world, Most enterprises are affected by slow app development, and almost every industry is facing disruption from fast and hungry competitors, as well as the fact that it takes teams of internal, partner, and public development against tons and tons of data and functional features. And the last point is the fact that companies are facing challenges when it comes down to making money from the usage of the data. They need help to identify, develop, and execute. So this is what APIs are the solution. Challenges faced by companies that join digital transformation are the ones addressed by APIs. And as mentioned by a quote from Forrester Research, APIs have the power to unlock new revenue streams, transform how you design and deliver change, and extend your value proposition through dynamic ecosystems of value. So in other words, the way I usually say it is that the capabilities that APIs will bring to the table are their ability to integrate everything, secure digital enterprise, accelerate development, and unlock the data value. However, for today's session, we will focus mainly on security. So all the examples we have covered during the previous slides contain security elements in each and every one of them. So for lots of business verticals, such as healthcare, financial, or retail, the biggest question that they need to answer is this one: how can I secure my data and my customer data and successfully go through a digital transformation in today's world? I mean, this is a world with expectations changing at a very fast pace, and the IoT is quite disruptive for lots of enterprises. So when it comes down to apply security to APIs, it can take time and increase your time to market for cool new application as well. And the reality is that cool always trumps security. So recently there has been some quite interesting cases in the news related to API security. So I wanted to show you some example as things have been happening for the past few years when it comes down to API breaches. So let's start with Snapchat. So in 2014, so 3 years ago, through one of their APIs, database data in regards to over 4.5 million users, personal info like name, phone number, address, got released. Yahoo, on October 2014, had their API servers impacted by a malicious code executing from 3 of their sports API. Moonpig, which is one of UK's best companies that offers personalized greeting cards, they had personal info related to more than 3 million of their consumers exposed through an API, including names, birthdays, email address, phone numbers, last 4 digits of credit card numbers, credit card expiry date. So that's a lot of personal information that got released. And here we have a great example of a company, Delmarva, who got impacted by an API vulnerability, which was identified as an insecure data object reference vulnerability, and where this is a case where social media such as Twitter quickly relayed the info, and this impacted the brand, as you probably imagine. And one of my favorite examples, Tesla, with its REST API that could be hacked via its iOS app 3 years ago, resulting in not just privacy concerns, but security concerns as well. The authentication protocol used by Tesla REST API was marked by security experts as flawed, since Tesla basically ignored most convention around API authentication, and they turn around and say, let's write our own code for authentication. And the Nissan Leaf, a great example of the cool factor that is overshadowing the security aspect expected from a car. So basically anybody could download the Leaf app from an app store. They obtain the VIN number for a specific Leaf vehicle, and they take over many of the vehicle key functions through that hack. So even though the VIN number is very difficult to obtain for a target vehicle, unless you basically carefully look at the bottom left corner of the windshield of that car, it was nonetheless an oops case where it could have easily been avoided. And the last case I want to talk about is Pokemon Go. No, I don't play this game on my smartphone, but several external developers ended up reverse engineering a non-public API that was designed by this company, Niantic, to build third-party apps. And due to the number of third-party apps accessing their servers, downtime and server issues impacted this company. So what they did, well, they ended up changing the API so that these third-party apps could no longer access the server anymore. However, guess what? A week later, the API got cracked again through reverse engineering once again. Okay, so in this case, it will not put a company out of business, but this shows that API security is not just about securing an enterprise, but also about maintaining the app experience. So when an API is hacked, its vulnerabilities begin to surface, and even though public APIs are usually the ones that are targeted, in the Pokemon case, it was a private, unpublished API that got hacked. So a private API does not necessarily mean that it is secured, contrary to what a lot of people believe. So it's not because it's private that it's hidden and that nothing will happen to it. So what's the best way to resolve all these vulnerabilities that we just saw when an enterprise is using APIs? Well, this is where you should be using or consider seriously an API management solution. So a hardened API gateway is a key component for any API management solution, and it must be able to first protect against web-based threat and OWASP vulnerabilities. For those who are not familiar with OWASP, it's a worldwide organization with a great mission, which is to make software security more visible. Your gateway should also be able to control access with single sign-on and identity management while maintaining convenience, which is extremely important. And finally, it should offer end-to-end security for apps, mobile, and the Internet of Things. While providing features such as social and proximity login, this is a huge sore point for security officers, and it will get much, much worse with the IoT in the near future. At CA Technologies, we believe that APIM has to extend beyond traditional clients and standards and embrace emerging IoT standards such as MQTT. So by addressing new functionalities important to developers such as in-app messaging, pub/sub, or local storage, this removes the security aspect from their hand, and by embracing extending standards, you can basically offer better security and integration and actually benefit from innovation as well. So with this level of integration, you can now create secure collaborative apps and address books. You can do secure messaging between users, application, and devices. You can also build application handling sensitive data while dynamically build, store, and delete this sensitive data. And finally, build secure apps consuming IoT data across different industries. So I would like to ask you a question via the polling menu of WebEx. So the question I would like to ask you is the following. What is your most important aspect when considering API security? Is it A, access control via authentication authorization, B, enforcing SSL TLS sessions between clients and your backend, C, implement rate limits and quotas, D, monitor API activities on your network, E, audit and monitor incoming outgoing messages, or F, other? So I will now launch the first question via the WebEx polling section. Let me quickly switch to my main screen if you don't mind. Just bear with me. Okay. So I will be launching the poll, and you will have basically 1 minute to answer the question. Please go ahead. Okay, so about 30 seconds left for the question. Thank you. right, so thank you. Thanks for those who answered. So basically, everyone basically said that the most important aspects about security is access control via authentication and authorization. Excellent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my presentation. So I'm just going to switch back to my second screen. Just bear with me. All right, there we go. So how should you secure your APIs? This is a very good question. So from mine, I will normally answer this question with this quote, well, it depends. So let's see why it depends. So on the previous slide, I mentioned it depends. Well, this is because every company's security requirement varies at the end of the day, and you never want to implement every possible protection available because everything you do comes with a cost, right? So you want to be specific and protect the things you need to. And there are many different processes out there to determine what those things are, how your company should protect them, and risk analysis is considered a great approach for this, an approach based on two pillars, risk assessment and risk management. So for risk assessment, we normally have to answer this question as we see on the screen, what's your risk? And for risk management, we normally answer the following question, what will you do about it? So for risk assessment, it begins with identifying your assets that you want to protect. And then you need to understand the vulnerabilities that those assets have in determining as well the threats to those vulnerabilities as well. And at the intersection of these three areas, that's where your risk is. So there's generally four recognized ways of managing risk. You can, first of all, avoid the risk. That means that you can basically do nothing that you plan to do that can expose you to risk. So here it means that you wouldn't create and publish APIs both internally and externally. If you ask me, it's not a great outcome. Now, you can also reduce the risk. So once you have identified the risk, you can take measures to protect your assets from that risk. And this is where API management with our gateway will normally come in. You can also share the risk. So it means you can ensure that if the risk occurs, well, you're spreading the cost of that risk across multiple entities, including, for instance, your insurance companies. Or you can retain the risk. This means that you accept the risk, then you own it. So you may not do anything to mitigate it, and you're basically willing to pay whatever the price is if the risk happens, such as impacting your brand. Again, not a great outcome for most enterprises. So once again, CA Technologies really is involved here at the reduction level, and we can help you to protect both your APIs and the applications at design time and at runtime as well. So let's take a look at some security features that's offered by our API gateway. So our solution provides many security capabilities to address all kind of high-level consideration that customers normally have when it comes down to API management. So one important aspect is to make sure that the API management solution that you want to put in place is certified and compliant. And our API gateway has the most recent and relevant common criteria certification and is both STIG and FIPS 140-2 compliant. So all our form factors offered by default FIPS 140-2 level 1 crypto processing, and we also offer as well an optional hardware acceleration card for our hardware appliance to reach a level 3. Now, our focus over performance will allow you to take advantage of our many security capabilities without experiencing significant negative performance impact as well. And you want to make sure that the API management you put in place is going to support industry standards, whether they are legacy, current, or emerging ones. And you want support for these standards to be our problem, not your problem. So our solution makes it easy to do this through simple configuration, and we stay ahead of those evolving standards as well for you. As for service virtualization, our solution can virtualize your services related to identities, protocols, and interfaces, and this is a feature used by our customer for various reasons. But it does have a security implication. By virtualizing your services, you can hide implementation details from attackers as well. As for identification, authentication, and authorization, we have different ways to support those aspects based on industry standards or vendors' proprietary mechanism. So we support many standards and vendor proprietary mechanism out of the box. So from an identification perspective, it's not just about being able to accept different credentials based on different standards or vendors' mechanism. It's also the ability to support identity federation, for instance, based on different standards, and identity brokering between different forms of identification across various standards, which is one of our strong features and something that we can help you with as well. Now, when it comes down to confidentiality, it means maintaining the confidentiality of the message, its content, and the context as well. And we can help you with that as well, whether it is point-to-point confidentiality through a secure transport mechanism or end-to-end confidentiality using message-level encryption or decryption based on industry standards from XML encryption to WS security to JWE, etc. And we make it easy to configure SSL and TLS either for one-way or two-way communication. Now, integrity is about making sure that the content or context of your message has not changed in transit, and our solution makes it easy to configure end-to-end integrity with message or element-level digital signature and verification based on various industry standards as well. Now, auditing and logging, very important features, very important aspect requested by consumers, and our solution offers very flexible capabilities for both aspects when it comes down to auditing and logging. So basically, our gateway can easily capture any part of a request or response message, which can then be visualized for a specific gateway or for a cluster of gateways. And these audits and log files can be sent remotely as well to an external database through syslog or SNMP, for example, or any other outbound protocol supported by our solution. So our gateway also supports non-repudiation through a combination of auditing, logging, and digital signatures. So basically, you can prove the receipt of messages that have been sent to you from, let's say, an outside client. Now, as for data classification and compliance, our solution can ensure that your messages are well-formed, can perform also XML and JSON schema validation, or make sure that the data being transmitted is compliant and that the data is being protected by using various out-of-the-box assertion to classify, mask, and filter messages content at runtime. Again, another strong feature of our API management solution. Last but not least, something very important to me, threat protection. There are so many threats out there that companies are concerned about, and our solution offers automatic protection for TCP IP-based attack, cursive parsing, XML bomb, external identity attack, schema poisoning, WSDL scanning, XML routing, detours, etc. So threat protection can be configured in a solution for both single and multi-messages denial of service attacks and protect against injection attacks like SQL or code injection. Something I also wanted to mention is rate limits and SLAs. So those also things are very important for companies, and this you can enforce them with high performance and accuracy across a cluster of gateways, for example, as well as offering a true replay attack protection across that same cluster as well. And the last point, virus scanning via ICAP protocol, specific support for semantic, McAfee, Sophos, can be performed through a solution as well. So we have covered various features that is offered by our API management solution, but end of the day, question is, where should I start? Or where should you start? Well, security is a very large discipline, as you probably know, so there's normally a process to follow, but at the end of the day, our customers sometimes ask us this question, where should I start, which I've just mentioned a few seconds ago. So there's a list of good starting points depending on what you need to protect, of course. So first of all, you need to try to reduce the attack surface. So expose only what is needed and ensure that all traffic goes through an API gateway. Then use a secure transport like SSL TLS. Also, control the access to your API so that only the right individual client can access your resources the way that you want, through your APIs, through different ways such as mutual authentication through SSL, HTTP basic authentication, OAuth 2, SSO API keys, etc. Then you want to enforce a strict interface. For example, you want to validate protocols, schemas, metadata, resource parameters, etc. So this is also very important. And as far as validating parameters values, well, usually industry experts will recommend to validate and encode input and output parameter values. But then at the end of the day, a lot of companies usually prefer to validate inputs rather than encoding both the input and the output. So it's important to consider all these options as well when you plan down your secure strategy for your APIs. Then you want to rate limit your traffic so it doesn't exceed your capacity. So customers have various reasons to impose rate limits or throughput quota, whether it's for business reasons or to protect their brand, for example, once again, against denial of service attacks. And finally, monitor, log, and audit to keep track of what's going on in your environment. The good news, we can help you with all this and much more. So let's move to a quick demonstration of our gateway with example of what can be done when it comes down to securing your APIs. So for today's demo, I will be running a Red Hat Enterprise Linux Virtual Gateway appliance through VMware Workstation version 12. And I will be running Policy Manager on my computer. And Policy Manager is a user interface that interacts with the gateway to provide you some example of things that can be done from the gateway to secure the access to an API. I will also be using SOAP UI to test things out as I will go through the demo. So let's start. So again, give me 1 second. I will just toggle to my other screen to launch the Policy Manager. Okay, just bear with me. Okay. So now you should all be seeing my main monitor with Policy Manager, which is once again the graphic interface that interacts with the gateway. So we can see here at the bottom left, I'm highlighting basically a URI called Webcast. So basically, requests received by the gateway will end at this URI. So and now we'll start building a policy and show you how you can easily secure an API with different assertions. So first thing I usually like to do is, as I mentioned in the presentation, is to audit. So I'm going to type here the keyword audit, and I will select audit messages and policy. And you can see when I build a policy, I just drag and drop. No coding, no programming. It's that easy. And I double click on it, and I will tell the system, I want you to capture any request coming in, coming out in a log file for future reference. And now what I will do before I go further, I always try to test, I like to test things to make sure things are okay. So I will return a fake JSON message from the gateway. And what I'm going to do is return this message. Okay. So when I click on Save and Activate here, the change takes effect right away. So I'm going to move to my SOAP UI. And I'm going to call this URI called Webcast. And you can see I get a reply here, no problem. So I can continue. I know everything is going to be okay. So the first thing I would like to do is to apply a first level of security, which is SSL. So I type SSL here, and I will require SSL or TLS security between the customer, the client, which is myself, and the gateway. So I will, again, drag and drop this assertion. Now, you have the option to just enforce SSL. Nothing prevents you to also require a client certificate, for example, X509, to be provided as well for authentication. So I'm going to click here, Save and Activate. And now I'm going to go back to my SOAP UI and submit the exact same request. and we see it's failing. Now, the gateway by default return a generic XML message, which is, again, a great way to protect, because if someone, for example, try to hack and get this, they have no idea what's going on. Nothing prevents you to customize the message you want to return to, let's say, a developer or a customer, and we'll see in a few seconds how you can easily do that. So basically now I need to know why am I getting this error message. So one thing I could do is to go to my gateway audit event here, and if I see that message was not processed, let me just maximize, it will be easier to see. Why? Because SSL was required but not present. Okay, no problem. So rather than HTTP, I will put HTTPS, and instead of the port 8080, I will use port 443. I submit the same request, and it goes through. So with just one assertion, by dragging and dropping it, I've already added a secret layer to my API, without any programming or coding. Now, what if I also want to authenticate? So right now, I'm just putting SSL, but everybody who knows the address could get there and retrieve the data. So what I will do is we'll go with the first example. We will request HTTP basic authentication. So again, drag and drop that here. And the credentials provided by the client or the application will have to be authenticated against identity provider. So here I'm going to drag and drop this assertion, authenticate against identity provider right here. And the system is asking me basically, please specify the identity provider. Now our solution use different ones. You can integrate with LDAP. You can integrate with different identity provider, Kerberos, for instance, your own like Tivoli. In this example, I'm going to use the internal identity provider, which is provided out of the box. So you can use our own identity provider within the solution, which I will use for today's demonstration. So I click Save and Activate. Now, I go back, and then I will basically submit the same request, and it tells me here authentication required. So yes, why? Because I'm forcing whoever's trying to access this URI to provide basic credentials. So I'm going to enter some credentials here. All right. And then I submit the same request, and you can see it's going through. So I've added a second layer of security. So I put SSL, and I'm forcing someone to provide credentials to retrieve information from the backend, which is, in this case, just a template being returned, of course. So if I go back to my log file, it basically tells me it found the user because I was successfully authenticated against an entry in the internal identity provider. But not only that, look at this here. It also captured the response, which is something I wanted. So this can be retraced in the log file later on by an admin for future reference. Excellent. So in this case, we're using here the internal identity provider. What if rather than this, you say, you know what, as a company, I'm using more and more OAuth. I want to authenticate with an OAuth token. No problem. Let's just remove quickly these two assertions. And then what I will do here is I will type OTK require OAuth2 token. And I will drag and drop this again over here. And I need to specify scope, which I will use OOB, which is out of the box, and I will not put a cache validation for this demonstration. I click Save and Activate. So my policy right now, I'm auditing what's going in, what's going out. I enforce SSL, and without a token, I cannot get this JSON response here. So I go back to SOAP UI. And rather than basic authentication, I'm going to use OAuth here 2.0. But of course now I'm not submitting any token. Let's see what's going to happen. It gives me an error message. Again, a default XML message that is returned by the solution to protect your environment. But then again, what if I want to customize this message for someone specific or for a developer, a consumer, a partner? No problem. Let's see how we can do that. So here on my path of assertion, I will type the keyword customize error response. And I will drag and drop this over here. And I will specify that the reply will be in application JSON. And then here I will need to specify a message. Sometimes I'm a little bit lazy. I prefer to use wildcards. So I'm returning a fake JSON response telling whoever's trying to access that a token for OAuth 2.0 is missing. okay, and basically to try again. I save and activate, I go back, and I submit, and now I have a customized error message, which is great, because with this now, it means something more to whoever's trying to access without revealing any information from your backend, without putting your backend at risk. So this is great. Now, okay, let's get a token. So I will use this flow, which is password credential grant with some credentials, an ID and a secret. I'm calling this, and you see in my scope, which I have mentioned on the policy out of the box, I get an OAuth token, I submit, and I get my backend. This is great. Now, remember on the presentation I said that the gateway can capture, once again, any information coming in, coming out. We're capturing right now message coming in, coming out. What if I want to capture that bearer token information? This is also possible for your log file. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to type the keyword add and select add audit details. And I will drag and drop this over here. And now I will tell the system, you're going to capture the following information. So the authorization in the header, okay, with a little wildcard. Basically, this will be tagged as this information, OAuth 2.0 access token. I click OK, save and activate. I go back to SOAP UI. Perfect. Now, you will see the difference here. So this was successful, but look, you can see here I also captured this information. So with, again, an easy assertion, no coding, no programming, and by telling the system exactly what to capture, I have this information that can be stored in a log file, again, for future reference. Excellent. So let's continue. So right now, as far as security, I put SSL in place, and I'm forced to submit an OAuth token, otherwise I cannot retrieve the information. So what if we want to also, security is not just about authentication authorization. Maybe you want to return specific information to specific people with specific condition. And we can use some logic for that, which I will show you with a very simple example. So I'm going to here temporarily remove this template. And right underneath here, I will use some logic. So I'm going to create a folder called at least one assertion must evaluate to true. And inside that folder, I will put two folder that must evaluate to true. So basically, we will have here two conditions. If all conditions are met in the first folder, no problem, this one will not be processed. If this does not meet any requirement, then it goes to this one. So excellent. What I'm going to do is build the first condition. In this scenario, it's quite easy. I will force the whoever's trying to access the backend to submit a parameter in the header with the value called detailed list. And if that is present, it will return a big JSON response. If this is not there, it will return less information, again, to protect maybe only to authorize specific people to provide additional information to access additional info from your backend. So I will select the set context variable and drag and drop this over here. And what I will do here is I will first set the expression that needs to be captured. So again, using that wildcard, I will capture a parameter that will be defined called query type, and that will be the name of my variable here. And now, once that I've captured this value, I will use a rule to compare, basically to see if that condition will be present or not to process the next part of the logic for this policy. So I drag and drop that over here, and now what I'm going to do is basically compare this variable, which is a string, and basically what we're going to do is tell the system that that query type, so that parameter, must contain the value which I mentioned a few seconds ago, detailed list. Okay? So if, as a client, I have a token, no problem, and then I submit a parameter query type that contains detail list, then I will get access to some information which will be returned from an API. So it will route through HTTP, and it will route to the following path. So big response URL. So it will return as much information as possible to this client. Now, to save some time, I can copy paste this and go here and I will basically modify this URL so that in this case, if I don't submit a parameter that contains detailed list, it will return less information to the requester who still have a OAuth token, but maybe was supposed to provide an additional piece of information that was missing. So we grant access to the data, but we return less data to that person or that individual. So I save this, I go back to SOAP UI, and I will test this parameter. So we can see here, again, the URI webcast, and we can see here the query type, which contains detailed list. So I submit the request, and we can see I have my OAuth token, and I see all this data. So I see here the office code, the city, the phone number, address, country, postal code, territory. So this is great. Now, let's test this logic. Let's say the value here instead of detail list will be detail. And I submit, and I get less data. Why? Because if I go back to my policy, it doesn't contain the word detail list here in that query type, in that parameter. Therefore, it returns less information. So this is kind of a security feature, but basically you can return more or less data to specific people, even though they got successfully authenticated or authorized. If something's missing, you can detect that through logic branching as well. Another feature I would like to show you for security is about protection against injection or attack. So if I type protect, we can see a lot of assertion coming out of the box with the solution. I'm going to use for this demo the SQL attack, which I will drag over here. And we have different ways to protect. And every time you hover, the solution will give you information about what it does. So I will check basically all options here. Save and activate. So again, it takes effect right away on the gateway. I go back to SOAP UI, and I'm going to use this rule here. And we can see the value contains here an apostrophe at the end of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I submit the request, which fails. We again returning a generic XML response from the gateway, which of course you can customize, but this is an example of protecting your the message returned to, for example, a hacker by not revealing exactly what's going on 100%. So you go here, and why did it fail? Well, it was flagged as protect against SQL attack assertion, and then it detected the apostrophe next to the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So again, with one assertion, I've increased even more the security of that API being exposed. The last case I want to show for today's demonstration is to protect against denial of service or someone submitting lots of requests for any reason. So I will type the keyword apply rate limit, and I will drag and drop this. And the system is asking me to provide some specifications, so I will instruct the gateway, do not accept more than 20 requests per second, regardless of the user authenticator or the IP address. And if you exceed this level, you will throttle, meaning that nothing will go through, it will fail the assertion. So what I expect to see when I submit the request is on the audit event, it will say something like message was not processed successfully. So I will save and activate. I go back to SOAP UI, and I will just run a test before I run the load test just to make sure everything is okay. Perfect. Now, as you can imagine, I mean, I am usually clicking quite fast, but I cannot click 20 times per second. I'm not that good. So I have this little policy here in SOAP UI. I will submit 30 threads, and then we'll see what's going to happen. And just to be on the safe side, I will submit several requests like this to build up, because I will show you another feature in a few seconds about the visibility of what's captured by the gateway in real time. So I will do it one more time. All right. So if I go back to policy, my audit event here, we see several times it failed. And why did it fail? Because the rate limit exceeded. So with that rule, it was exceeding what I've put in place, so it basically failed the assertion. So what we just saw is that using simple rules and using only few typing, no programming, no coding, the solution can help you to basically put security easily on what you want to expose to both the outside world or to your employees within your own infrastructure. So this, we saw the audit event, we see what's going on, what's captured by the gateway. How about a visual representation of what's going on? So this kind of activity can be visible as well through the dashboard. So here we will see, I can zoom in as well. So I can see in green things that went in with success, and the yellow are policy violation. So for example, here we can see that there was 110 successful requests and 93 violation, and here it was 161.72. And you can see the front end latent response time, front end, back end. So this information is quite interesting. And you can not only see what's going on in one gateway, you can see what's going on in a cluster as well. So that's very good information from an administrative perspective. You can also see activities for a specific published service. So one thing I like also is if I want information about what's going on in the time interval, nothing prevents me to right-click and see the activity like the log. So why did it fail? Why is there policy violation? Okay, I see it now. So the correlation between log files and the dashboard is actually quite good. This is visually available out of the box on the gateway, but nothing prevents you, like I mentioned on the presentation, to export this outside to be consulted by a third-party tool or something you already have, for like a business intelligence reporting tool, for instance. So this was to give you an example of things that can be done on our CAPI gateway through Policy Manager. So I'm going to briefly stop sharing, go back to my second monitor to conclude the last part of the presentation. So I will share my second screen. All right. So we now move to the last part of today's webcast, so how CA technologies can make the digital transformation journey easier and more secured. So I believe personally that CA Technologies is at a unique position, and our solution can easily complete your API management strategy regardless of your business or industry. As we saw earlier, there's a lot of verticals, and everyone can benefit from an API management solution. And with our strong security background, we're perfectly suited for the world of mobile and IoT. So we can see here CLI API Creator, which is a tool that can be used to easily and quickly create and deploy enterprise-class REST APIs from both SQL and NoSQL data while reducing dramatically your time to market. And as for the gateway, which we saw in the demonstration as well, it truly acts as a middleman between the various clients and the exposed backend, and it offers at the same time a true end-to-end protection and offers well capabilities such as orchestration, translation, threat protection, data integrity, identity bridging, and so on. So enterprise exposing APIs to both internal and external developers through the portal, which is CAPI Developer Portal, they can benefit from having in place a one-stop shop environment for their APIs. They can basically make them more attractive by offering to developers like documentation, testing environment, and code samples for the APIs, as well as facilitating the consumption of those APIs via the apps being built against your APIs. Now, we also have the Mobile API Gateway, which is a beefed-up version of the gateway. It can help your enterprise to easily offer new features and options like in-app messaging, single sign-on, pub/sub, push notification to your developers through, for instance, SDKs. So they can focus mainly on creating amazing application while securing the access from these apps to your exposed data. So you make their life easier by not only giving them a secure API, but if you want to add functionality easily to their apps, they don't have to code or program anything. You provide that to SDKs, and everybody benefits, and guess what? Your time to market is much faster as well. And finally, the latest addition to our API management family, API Precision Monitoring, it can help you to capture, correlate, and display precise details of gateway transaction, and it offers at the same time, for instance, MySQL and overall database performance, OS performance info on the host like memory, CPU, swap space, and so on. So this gives you an idea that we provide a complete mobile Internet of Things security platform as well. Now, another key element that I want to mention here is the API Academy. It's a service that we provide to enterprise looking to migrate to the application economy, and it completes also as well their digital transformation journey. So the Academy covers best practices through workshops offered all around the world, and the targeted audience would normally be like API and app developers, backend developers, ops team, as well as enterprise architects. And the goal of the Academy is to help teach best practices, architecture, business casing, hackathon services. But one thing I want to mention here, this is not about CA Technologies because this is an independent academy, right? And at the end of the day, when it comes down to positioning our API management solution, we're recognized as a leader through different market studies for reasons like security, integration, mobility, API lifecycle, mobile app support, and so on. So when it comes down to quantify the value, we commissioned a report from Forrester Consulting last year on the topic of total economic impact of our solution. So it was a study that tracked the business value of our product to our consumers, and I would like to highlight two things here. So first, both Forrester and CA customers know that security for mobile and IoT is a key component for their total economic impact. And on the upper right of the screen, you can see that the average return on investment was 275%, and it's related by a benefit over $6 million versus an average installation cost of $1.5 million, which leads to a net present value, an NPV, of $4.2 million with a payment that is basically done in 12 months. This is not a very bad ROI if you ask me. So now I complete this webcast with the following statement from Forrester. APIs are perhaps the most critical technology in digital business design. And let me add my 2 cents here. There's simply no excuse to fail in securing APIs. No one wants to be that Nissan engineer that went, oops. So let me just go back to my main screen. We have about 3-4 minutes left. Let me see if I can go through some questions. So let me just stop the screen sharing here. Okay. All right. So one question I have here is, when I mentioned the SSL, using the assertion SSL to secure both ends, what kind of certificate we support or what kind of process, like for example, X509. So basically you can have some authenticating and providing P12 information, and then this can be validated through X509, and then on the other end, if it matches and the client is good to go, then he can access whatever is defined afterwards. This one is about the identity provider. So do you support, no, let's see, it's not really no, okay. What protocol do you support other than Kerberos? So yeah, I mentioned Kerberos, I mentioned Active Directory, Tivoli Access Manager. You can pretty much name them, SAML. We support pretty much all kind of authentication authorization protocols. Also, for those interested with OAuth, I mean, not only we offer the OAuth toolkit, so a company wants to implement OAuth on site, we can easily help them to do that, but we support as well OpenID Connect, which is also becoming more and more popular for a lot of companies. And finally, there's a question here about the gateway. I think it's something about the form factor. Yeah, so you showed in demo that you're using the OVA file in VMware. What other type of gateway offered? So we offer obviously the OVA file, so this is the most popular version. Some companies want to go with the hardware form factor, so an Oracle, you can run an Oracle box. Software can be installed on a server, no problem. We also have an offering on SaaS, so we have our own SaaS environment in Amazon, AWS. We offer a Microsoft Azure appliance if you own, for instance, your own Amazon, and as well we offer AMI version, so if you have your own Amazon cloud, you can install it on the cloud as well. And finally, Docker, which is catching up more and more in EMEA as a good alternative to run the container. So we offer that as well. And very important is the solution can be deployed not only on-premise, like a lot of companies will go obviously on-premise for all kind of reasons, but you can deploy it on the cloud, you can go to a SaaS approach, or even hybrid. So you can have, for instance, the gateway on-premise, and you can have on the cloud the portal for a different reason, or for example, if you go with a SaaS subscription with the portal, then your gateway can be on-premise. So it's we offer different ways to deploy the solution. So you're not stuck with, let's say, we only offer a cloud version of the solution. That's not true. We offer a different form factor, a different deployment type. So I see right now it's 4 p.m., so this will end our webcast. So for those who I can answer the question, I will send you a reply by email in the next few days. So I thank you for attending this session about API security as a digital enabler, and I wish you a great rest of the day. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.